letting people in, and we're going to be going live. We're going to be live streaming this event as well. So we're just going to give people a minute for everybody to get in here. We've got quite a few people who've responded to this, so thank you all for your interest in our Earth Day Summit. And we've got some wonderful guest speakers here tonight, and I think the topics are going to be pretty relevant to all of us who live in Spadina, Fort York. Let's see. So, Ben, is everybody in, do you think? Yeah? Okay. So I'll start with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Mississaugas, the Chippewa, and I'd like to acknowledge that this is the land covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And the other thing, you know, especially considering this is an Earth Day Summit, and I've mentioned this, some of you may have heard me talk about this before, but when they were putting in the water treatment, the Harrison water treatment plant in East Toronto along the waterfront, they came across some footprints in the clay, and there was a man and a woman and a child, and they were somewhere around 15,000 years old. And so those were some of the first footprints after the last ice age. And those were some of the first inhabitants of this land as the glaciers were retreating. And so for at least 15,000 years, First Nations people have been stewards of this land. And I think that, you know, when we're talking about an Earth Day Summit, we're talking about, you know, reducing our own greenhouse gas and our own impact on the environment. I think it's really appropriate to think about that 15,000 years of stewardship, and that we should set ourselves up to be stewards of this land and for those that follow us. So anyways, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. The goal of this session, I think it sums up pretty quickly or pretty easily with a statement that came out of Boise, a catchphrase. It was think globally, act locally. And so we've got some speakers on a number of different topics, and it's an opportunity to learn about you know, what's happening with greenhouse gas emissions and you know, like globally and locally here in Ontario. But it's also an opportunity for each of us in Spadina, Fort York to have some actions coming out of this day. So at the end of this session, you should all have something that you can do to you know, try to improve the environment in our community. So we've got, at the beginning of this, I think it's important to talk about the recent UN report. The UN report on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change outlines some of the things that we need to do in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. It said that, and it's really, the report was raising the alarm bells. The temperatures, the global temperatures have risen by 1.1 degree. And the goal is to not let temperatures exceed 1.5 degrees, because that's when we're already starting to see extreme weather events more and more often. I've been following in California. There was one place in the mountains that had 70 feet of snow this year. And they're now looking at, you know, huge flooding. And this is California that has earthquakes. It's had heat waves and forest fires and floods. Like, we're seeing more and more of that kind of impact. Not just in California, but globally because of climate change. So it's really incumbent upon us to do more to reduce the impact of climate change. And the thing globally, when we're thinking about this globally, the global energy carbon dioxide emissions grew by 0.9% last year to 321 megatons. You know, it's the highest level ever. So not only, you know, are we not actually reducing globally, we're not reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, we're actually increasing them. And Canada, and us as Canadians, we are per capita some of the highest GHG emitters on the planet. So it really is incumbent upon us to start taking some action to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And we've got some wonderful, I mentioned we've got some incredible panelists here tonight to help us out, and they're going to be covering all kinds of topics from fighting floatables in the Toronto Harbor. We're going to learn more about the Limberlost building, the tall timber building that's going up at George Brown College, about geothermal cooling and heating at the well, about installing EV charging stations in condo buildings, and we're going to learn more about the Greenbelt. So we're going to, I'm so excited about having all these people. The UN is recommending now that we need to get our emissions down. They have to be cut in half by 2030, and we're already at 2023. And we're not even globally, we're not even on the downward trajectory. We need to focus on climate resilient development so that every building that's built, is built not just for today's climate goals, but for the future, for zero emissions. And, there's a number of things that the City of Toronto has done and that other municipalities have done, but there's a lot more that the provincial government could be doing as well. And I'll just mention a couple of the things that we're pushing the provincial government to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the first one is to stop the 413 highway. There's no urban planner that ever said that we needed a highway where the 413 is going. And it's just going to increase the amount of sprawl and that kind of suburban growth onto farmland and onto wetlands, which is going to increase our greenhouse gas emissions and the commuting distance that people have to get to work. We need to stop building gas plants, and we are actually building gas plants in Ontario. So we need to stop doing that. We need to invest in wind, solar, and geothermal, and we're going to learn about geothermal, as I mentioned, at the well. We need to stop Bill 23 and restore the Greenbelt. So Bill 23 is the one that's allocating or converting, removing the Greenbelt protections on 7,000 acres of Greenbelt property. And so that's something that has to be stopped. We absolutely have to save the Greenbelt and save our farmland in Ontario. We have 15 million people in Ontario, and we're an enormous province. We're the size, Ontario's a million square kilometers. It's the size of Germany, France, and the United Kingdom combined. And, now a lot of it is not arable, but we have a large amount of farmland here in the south. We've got it in the Clay Belt, up north of North Bay in the Timmins area. And so we have an enormous amount of farmland, but in spite of that, even today, we are net food importers. Ontario imports $10 billion worth of food per year. So even though we've got a small population and a lot of arable land, we are still importing food. So we've got to stop paving over our farmland because we're going to need it. And we're thinking about future generations. Future generations are going to need it as well, especially as these extreme weather events impact the climate. Okay. And we've got to stop using fossil fuels for heating new buildings. And so this is some of the things that you're going to learn about tonight. And to kick it off, I'll start off with Chelsea Rockman. Chelsea is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto's Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. She is also the head of operations and science programming and application lead for the U of T trash team. I didn't know the U of T had a trash team. That's pretty cool, Chelsea. And she will share the results of their Fighting Floatables project that has removed nearly 100,000 small pieces of plastic from the Toronto Harbour. So Chelsea, go ahead, take it away. Tell us about your project, the Fighting Floatables.
Yeah, I will do. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, my name's Chelsea, and we do have a trash team. So I got to University of Toronto about 6 or 7 years ago now. And with two colleagues, we started the U of T trash team. So I'm going to show a couple slides to show you some of our work, but we are essentially, oh no, I'm not seeing the right screen. Hold on, let me fix this.
Okay.
Can you tell me what you're seeing?
We see a slide that says trapping and tracking trash.
Okay, good. Good. Okay. Yeah. So sorry about that. Okay. So we are basically a group of students as well as early career researchers working to reduce plastic pollution. And we try to do it through education, through community cleanups, and through really, really applied science. So in addition to my research lab at U of T in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, which is...
Oh, Chelsea, you froze. Okay, while we're waiting for
cleaning up the garbage that ends
Chelsea,
up.
you froze for a second. Can you repeat your last statement?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm having technical issues. Where did you lose me? I'll just go back to introducing the project.
Sure.
So what I'm gonna talk about tonight is our work on the waterfront, where we are basically trapping garbage or trapping litter on the waterfront to get the floatables, the plastic pollution out of the water. And this is relevant to a lot of what was discussed earlier about climate change, and that right now we are trying to deal with this issue of plastic pollution and trying to reduce our waste and build a more circular economy, which is also relevant to fossil fuels because plastic is made out of virgin oil. And so how can we make a more circular economy and reduce waste? So our Fighting Floatables project was one of our first projects that we started with the U of T trash team. And we started it by bringing together a lot of local stakeholders in our community. So this includes Ports Toronto, as well as the City of Toronto and TRCA. And after we got started, we brought many more groups together, including the Harbourfront Center and the Waterfront BIA and Swim Drink Fish. And we built the Toronto Inner Harbour Floatable Strategy. So our strategy is just a couple years old, maybe now 3 years old. We have a strategic plan and we're trying to work together to reduce plastic pollution in our lakes. And so together we do several things, but probably what's most notable is our actually cleaning the litter out of the lake. And we do this with trash traps. So we have sea bins on the waterfront. You may have seen them in the slips. There's one in front of Beaver Tails. There's some near the music gardens. And we also have these litter traps in the storm drains along Queens Quay. And so those capture the litter that run off the road when it rains and prevents it from going into the lake in the first place. And so what I'll talk to you about tonight is the results that we have from last summer, and we'll be starting our program this summer actually in just a few weeks. So last summer we had 11 sea bins, and here you can see where they are in red. So they included the Outer Harbor Marina. We've had them at the island. We won't this year. And then along the waterfront, and in purple, you can see where our 10 litter traps are. And they will have signs this year. So as you walk along the waterfront, you can see where they are. One of the things I really love about our program is we couldn't do it without our students. So we hire about 6 or 7 students every summer. We give them summer jobs where they are working on the waterfront every day. They're emptying the traps. So yes, they are taking out the garbage, but they're out there in their t-shirts. They're talking to the community. People ask, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? So they're educating and they're doing outreach. And then they're also quantifying and characterizing what we capture to inform solutions. So last summer, we had our biggest year yet, where we diverted 118 kilograms of anthropogenic debris or trash, basically floating garbage from our waterfront. And this included almost 100,000 pieces of microplastics or small pieces of plastic debris. And if you add this up by weight, it's equivalent to about 40,000 plastic spoons, just to sort of try to put that into perspective. So we can report our impact, but what I think is most useful is reporting what we're actually collecting to see if we can then use this information to inform upstream solutions. So the majority of what we collect are broken down bits of plastic. But once we get into the products, a lot of what we see are cigarette butts, which the filter is plastic pollution, and a lot of people don't know that. So when the cigarette butt is thrown on the ground, it's not paper or biodegradable material. We see a lot of foam. We see a lot of food packaging, bottle caps, plastic bags. Some of these are things that we have on the federal plastic ban. Some of them are not. And then we see a lot of really small plastic, which includes, again, a lot of the styrofoam, as well as pre-production plastic pellets from industry upstream. And one of the things that's really interesting about our styrofoam is we find that about half of it is not from takeout containers, it's actually from construction. So how can we think about how we can change construction industry to be trapping that material on site so it doesn't get into the water? Now, I think Chris mentioned earlier the idea of thinking locally or thinking globally and acting locally. And it's exactly what we like to do as part of our U of T trash team. So last year, we actually launched the International Trash Trap Network with the Ocean Conservancy. So right here out of our little community in Toronto, we launched a global network of people trapping trash around the world. And reporting their impact as part of this global network and looking at what they collect to inform local solutions. So we're part of a local change as well as part of a global change. And so you can see that this is what we tracked this year globally, and we're slowly increasing our network by the numbers. And finally, what I want to leave you with, and then of course I can answer questions later, is how I think some of our work informs solutions. So one of the things I think is really important is education. So we could formalize school programs. So we actually have curriculum that we take into the 5th grade classrooms in Toronto, and having school programs to teach kids about the plastic cycle and the things we can do to keep these materials out of our waterways. We can educate people about combined sewer overflow. We find a lot of wet wipes and other materials that are ending up in our waterways from sewage when we have overflow. So things that shouldn't be flushed down the toilet. And also that cigarette butts are plastic pollution, and those shouldn't be thrown on the ground. The same people who litter cigarette butts likely would not litter a straw, and we need to be thinking about them in the same way, which that leads to better waste collection. So having more areas for people to throw things away. So this includes more cigarette butt receptacles, but also more bins or more frequent emptying. We have a problem in Toronto with overflowing garbage bins. So how can we think about better garbage cans in the area that maybe compact the trash with solar panels, or we just have sensors on them and they can get emptied more frequently. And then finally, in terms of upstream policies, maybe removing the plastic from cigarette butts. We don't necessarily need those in the filter. You can make the filter out of something else. You can remove the filter and you don't have like a different health effect. We need to work, I think, with our industry upstream on zero pellet loss. They're listening, they're working with us. We have traps in their manufacturing sites as well, and maybe start talking to construction sites about not letting that material go. And then this summer, we're starting a project on the waterfront. We've been doing it, but this year we're trying to really pilot reusable foodware programs to get less of that single-use plastic items from our restaurants and more of the reusable materials. So I'd be happy to answer questions in the Q&A, but I will leave it at that. And hopefully you'll see us this summer in these t-shirts on the waterfront. So look for us, we'll be there trapping trash every year, and we'd love to tell you more about what we do. So thank you again, and sorry about the technical difficulties in the beginning.
No problem. Chelsea, that was a really good presentation. How long have you been doing this? How long's the floating photobles? Because I think it was at the announcement with Port Toronto.
Yeah, that was 2019. So the U of T trash team, we started in 2017, and it took us a couple years to get permission and resources to get our first trap. So our first sea bins were 2019, and the project's been growing ever since.
Okay. And but you know what, we will be taking questions, everybody. If you have a question, you can post it in the chat. After our presentations, after our presenters have all spoken, we're going to have a Q&A. So if you are watching online, you can post, you can comment, and we will pick up those questions. And we're also going to be picking up the questions from the chat. But we'll go to our next presenters now. Mark Marmer from Signature Electric and Mabel Fulford from Peak Power. Mark Marmer is the founder and executive director of Signature Electric. He is always on the lookout for innovative and interesting ways to improve his clients' electrical systems to increase quality and even save energy. And Mabel Fulford is the director of innovation partnerships at Peak Power, with a professional and academic background in global energy systems, combining technical, economic, and policy subjects. She is president of the Young Professionals in Energy, Toronto. And welcome to both of you. I haven't been to Signature Electric, but I have done a tour of Peak Power, and I was really impressed with the work that's going on there and the concept of it. So maybe could you just start and just explain the concept of Peak Power? And then Mark, I know, is going to be talking as well about getting EV charging stations into condos, which I think is a topic that we're all interested in. So Mabel, go ahead.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm going to pass it over to Mark first to give a bit of a background on EV charging in condos, and then I'll speak a bit about some of the new technologies around vehicle to grid that Peak Power is working on.
Actually, it's probably a good sequence. I'll say it. So Mark, you take it away.
Good. Thanks very much. Yeah, we'll get the cars in and then we'll find out what Mabel can do with those cars. I apologize for the phone ringing in the background. It'll stop hopefully shortly. Not the only one at home. So I've been driving an EV for probably about 7 years now. And we, between the company and my house, we own 3 EVs, and I'm fortunate to live in a single family home. So I have no problem charging. I have a charger at my house and I use it whenever I want. People that live in Spadina, Fort York, a lot of them live in condominiums, and it's not quite as simple as they would. They can't make it. It's not as simple as a choice that you make for your own home. But being able to have access to a home charger really makes the whole experience of driving an EV, very pleasant and much easier.
Yeah. So, somebody's still making some calls there. So Mark, I actually live in a condo. I live in a condo, and I'm in a condo building right now, and our board's been wrestling with this issue of how do we get EV charging stations in.
No problem. So, yeah, so the first thing I need you to do, which I'm sure Chris has already done, is go down to your manager of your building and say, I'm interested in getting an EV charger in my space. What have you guys got in place? And chances are you'll get a blank look when you get that, but that's your first step, because it's entirely possible the condo's already thinking of something or has something in place. We have almost 70 condos that are and to some extent fully EV ready. So you may have just happened to be in one of those, and they'll just tell you how they managed it in their condo. But if not, then you'll say, well, what can I do? What used to be the situation was you really couldn't do much as an owner, but a while ago, the Condo Act changed, particularly here in Ontario, and we have sort of a right to charge. So you can say, well, I live in the building and I would like to have an EV charger. And if you follow what the requirements are of the Condo Act, and frankly speaking, you might need a little bit of help, putting the forms and what have you together and making a plan of how this is supposed to happen. We have people that come to us almost every single day for this. And you can put together a plan and present it to your property manager. If you present it properly, a 60-day clock starts. And in 60 days, a lot of people don't know this, in 60 days, the condo has to either accept what you've provided or give you a reasonable alternative. So what it does is it lights a bit of a fire under the management and the board of directors, something that never happened before. So, hopefully this wouldn't be necessary and the condo would be proactive, but if they're not, this is a choice that you can make. And it's unique here in Ontario. If you were in BC, you don't have this right to charge, and it can be very challenging. And before that, it was very challenging. So there's that piece of it. That's sort of what I can do as an owner. Ideally, if you happen to sit on a board or you're a manager or you can talk to your board, we're happy to come and find a way to be able to have charging in the building that's really hands off for everybody. The chargers in your space, we have means of, we use a third party to do the billing for the electricity. We provide tap card authentication so that you have security. Nobody else is using your charger in the building. And we have something called dynamic load management, a means of being able to use the electricity that's in the building, because it's sort of a fixed amount of electricity, to serve as many people as we can. It's a little bit complicated to explain in 5 minutes, but we're happy to provide that education to boards that come forward. Almost every installation we have at some point or other stops, and we have at least 1 or 2 education sessions, and we're happy to do that as part of the whole package that we offer. Is this going to work for your condo, Chris? 2 years you've been waiting, I think.
Well, they've been discussing it for a while, and the challenge is, I guess, like if one person comes and you want to charge electricity, like you want to have an EV charging station, then you have to run the conduit and you have to have the electricity, access to the panel, and versus doing the entire building, like running. And I'm wondering, with EV charging, are we going to get to the point where every parking spot will have its own EV charger, Or is it going to be a designated area within the condo building, a certain number of spots, and you go in there and you book a time or whatever to charge your vehicle?
So yeah, the two things that you're talking about, we call it community charging. I have 4 or 5 chargers and I share them. This is a very challenging thing. Not in a plaza, that works perfectly fine. I came to shop for 2 hours, I leave, somebody else comes in, and whenever they come, they come. But people that live in buildings, this is not really practical, because even if I put in 4 chargers, if I have 8 people, if you come home at night at 8 o'clock, it's not likely you want to move your car at midnight. So we have to look for ways that don't cause any tension in these communities. We want this to be simple and hands-off. We don't want people upset with the board, the manager, or other people in the building. You never move my car. So we look to, you asked a question, what am I going to do for this first person? We really would like you to look, not what I'm going to do for the first person, what will I do for the 10th person? Treat the first person exactly the same way, and you won't have a problem. And I want to address what you asked me about every single space. I tell the boards not to get too caught up in this. I have, 275 spaces, and how am I going to manage 275 cars? Things have a way of changing. And technology evolves. It's entirely possible that in sometime in the near future, or not too far off, charging will be a very similar thing to what's happening with filling your car with gasoline relatively quickly, relatively available. And it will be nice to have something in your home or your condo, but you'll have another sort of reasonable option. It's not that great right now, because you're having to sit for sometimes a half an hour. That seems like a long time to sit a couple of times a week. But let's make decisions right now based on the information we have available, do the best that we can, and we'll keep an eye to the future and figure out ways to share this as best we can.
Okay, well, you know what, Mark, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your experience with this. It is something that we're wrestling with in the condo buildings, and it is, but it is definitely the future. I've already got a savings account that I'm putting money away, because I'm hoping to buy an electric minivan as soon as one becomes available.
Okay, when you buy the van, then you'll come to visit us at Signature Electric, and we'll plug it into the charger we have behind our place.
Okay, Mabel, so tell us what can happen when we've got vehicles charging in buildings. What can happen? What can Peak Power do with the electricity?
Absolutely. So Peak Power is an energy software company, and our optimization platform creates revenue from distributed energy resources, including buildings, batteries, and electric vehicles, by allowing them to participate in our electricity markets. So the goal there really is to enable customers, buildings, individuals to profitably achieve their sustainability goals. We've worked closely with Signature Electric on a number of EV charging projects. So it's a pleasure to be presenting jointly with Mark this evening, and to add that layer of, now that we've got our EV chargers in vehicles, what does that then unlock? Peak Power is founded and headquartered in Toronto. We also operate in California, New York, and the US Northeast, but our head office is local. We're in the neighborhood, and we are growing. And if you're interested in joining our team, please do check out our website, which is at peakpowerenergy.com. We'd be delighted to hear from you.
Okay, and the thing that I noticed about Peak Power when I was there is that I was impressed with is that, so you like, if I'm commuting, if I lived in the 905 and I commute in my electric vehicle, I plug it into one of these Peak Power stations at in the parking lot, in the parking garage at a building, a commercial building, and I can actually make money from the electricity that's stored in my batteries.
Exactly. So traditionally, the electric grid is the ultimate just-in-time delivery model. So today, literally every time somebody flips a light switch, a power plant has to adjust its output. And the biggest factor that drives our electricity costs is meeting those peak moments of demand. It would, imagine if we sized our roads for peak rush hour on the busiest day of the year, and it runs empty the rest of the year. So you can imagine how inefficient that is when we have other alternatives. Also, the biggest limiting factor we have to decarbonize our electricity supply is providing storage capacity so that with storage, those assets can store surplus renewable power when it's available and deliver it back to the grid when it's needed to be used.
Okay,
And
so when I get my electric minivan, and I'm waiting for one, and I'm hoping it's going to have flowers on it and things, but I can actually park it in a peak power station and plug it in. And is it going to help me? And then, so if you're talking about a peak day, is that a day that's really hot when everybody's burning, using air conditioning? Is that the kind of day that you're looking at?
That's exactly it. So that's exactly the vision. And in Ontario and most of North America, our grid peaks on the hottest days of the year in the late afternoon when everybody's turned on their air conditioning. And so by plugging in a vehicle using bidirectional charging technology, the vehicle can actually provide energy back to the grid. So for our current peak drive pilot project, it's based in downtown Toronto with 21 Nissan Leaf vehicles in large downtown commercial office buildings. And basically they provide their power back to the grid on typically the 20 to 30 hottest days of the year. And that enables us to address the most expensive hours of electricity on the grid, and also the dirtiest, because those times of peak power demand is when the grid has to turn on all of the most inefficient, dirtiest power plants that we don't need to use most of the time in the year. And so vehicle to grid technology creates a huge opportunity so that electric vehicles not only can reduce emissions from the transportation sector by replacing gasoline and diesel powered vehicles, but also it can help us decarbonize electricity that we use for everything else by balancing renewables on the grid and reducing the costs and improving the reliability of the grid.
Okay, so it sounds absolutely amazing. So, you're actually using the electricity that's stored in the battery of the vehicles to help offset the grid. And instead of firing up gas power plants, you're actually using the electricity, presumably, well, at that point, the green electricity from the vehicles. Okay, so Mabel, thank you so much. Is there anything else before we move on? And we're going to come back to you for questions.
Sounds great.
Yeah, okay. Mabel, thank you so much. And Mark, thank you so much for being here. Stay tuned because we will come back to you for questions. Our next speaker is Neris Rao from Limberlost Place. Neris is project director for Limberlost Place at George Brown College's waterfront campus. She will be discussing the Mass Timber Net Zero Carbon Emissions project that will be the first institutional building of its kind in Ontario. And Neris, I've been watching this thing go up on the waterfront and I'm just loving it. I used to do a lot of woodworking. I love watching this project come to fruition. So tell us a little bit more about Limberlost Place.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me here tonight. I'm really honored to be here with this amazing agenda and this amazing panel. I'm going to share what will mostly actually just be some pictures I'm going to go through and tell you a little bit about Limberlost Place. Around 2018, George Brown began planning for our new building on the waterfront. You may know we already have an existing School of Health Sciences and we have our School of Design in the Daniels building at the waterfront. And this will be our third building. We really wanted to align with the teaching and the research that we were already doing in green construction and smart buildings. And we saw this as a huge opportunity to build on our commitment to continue to create environmentally sustainable campuses. So the result of that many years of planning is Limberlost Place, currently being built at Queens Quay in Sherbourne, in front of our original waterfront campus building. It will house a number of George Brown programs, the School of Computer Technology, the School of Architectural Technology, importantly, because we really do see this as a living lab for our students, as well as just a building for them to go to school in. We will have a childcare center to serve the community, and we will also house the Brookfield Sustainability Institute, which is a new research hub for George Brown, and it is focused on finding solutions to fight climate change. Within the building, we also have some amazing places for students, including a fitness center, lots of collaborative space, individual study space. It's really very student focused in that respect, as well as dedicated Indigenous space as well.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you see everything?
Yeah.
Okay. Limberlost is what we call a tall mass timber building. It's 10 stories, and as was mentioned, it is currently the tallest mass timber institutional building in Ontario. And to me, that's really important. Mass timber construction is really still in its infancy, in the beginning stages within the industry. And in order for it to become really environmentally meaningful, we need to start to see mass timber being used in many different types of buildings and different sizes of buildings, which up till now, the various codes haven't really allowed. So we're breaking barriers there. And we're really proud that Limberlost is going to help to demonstrate the successful use of innovative, cost-effective mass timber structure for institutional use. Wood is a renewable building material, and we've sourced our timber domestically. It comes from Quebec, and it comes from a supplier who has their own sustainably managed forests, where harvested trees are replanted for future use in a very sustainable manner. We know realistically we are going to continue to build buildings. And so the goal is that we have to try and reduce the carbon footprint of the industry. And mass timber construction can help reduce the greenhouse gas emissions created by the built environment. Wood sequesters or stores carbon, and it's less carbon intensive to produce than any other building material. So it can play a really important role in climate change mitigation and really sustainable development of cities and sustainable building. The next number of slides, I really just wanted to proudly, of course, show off the progress of our construction these are starting to show the progress as we move forward. You can see here the mass timber columns and what we call the mass timber slab bands. And this is a view actually of what will become the childcare outdoor space. This is some of our carpenter workers putting in the slab bands. You'll notice the building has a steel core. At the moment, we wouldn't have been allowed to do an entirely mass timber building. I think that will come as the industry develops, but for this building, we have a mass timber core for our stairs and our elevator core. This shows you a really good perspective from above, an almost completed floor of the mass timber. Another view from Sherburne Common as the building really progresses up. We're close to the 9th floor now. This gives you a really nice view of how warm and clean the mass timber is to construct with, and how clean the construction site is. We like to point out these mass timber columns. These will be exposed. These are the childcare center outdoor space, and the wood will remain exposed. We have 30% exposed wood in this building. It was a challenge to get to that amount of exposed wood. That's something else that will develop. You'll see more and more exposed wood in these buildings. The columns are incredibly large in this building. There is one on the north east corner, if you ever get a chance to see it. It is a 21,000 pound mass timber column. It is 3 stories, and it is currently the largest mass timber column in North America. The object you're seeing in this slide is our mass timber bridge, which connects Limberlost Place to our existing health sciences building. And it is actually currently the longest mass timber bridge in North America. And I point this out because it really starts to show that it is still in the infancy, the mass timber construction within the industry, definitely expanding and growing. But these are new innovations that we're seeing on this project. However, Limberlost is not just the mass timber. The mass timber has definitely helped us get to net zero carbon emissions with the building, but we've also really strived for even more sustainable features. So it does have many smart building technology features, building automation features, daylight harvesting, automation of our lights, and so on. It is LEED Gold certification. It meets Tier 4 of the Toronto Green Standard, which is actually the 2030 standard. It has a green roof. It has photovoltaic panels on the roof, which will allow us to generate some energy. And we are using a district energy solution and deep lake cooling. We also have a very innovative solution called solar chimneys. On each side of the building, we have what we call solar chimneys, which actually use a system of operable windows, which can take fresh air from the outside and draw them through the building and push it out throughout the building. So no natural gas, extremely sustainable. And we're very proud of the progress on the building. And I think happy to take questions at the end of the session.
Okay, that's great. Neris, it's a really fascinating and beautiful building that's going up there, and it's wonderful that it's in this area. You know, there's one other thing I'd just like to point out. I used to live in Northern Ontario in Geraldton, and I worked for the Ministry of Natural Resources on the forest fire crew up there. And afterwards, over the last 10, 15 years, as people stopped reading newspapers, the pulp industry, the pulp and paper industry just died. And, you know, the pulp mills in a lot of those communities, it was often a one industry town. And without when the pulp mill closed, it really hurt the community economically. And so it's wonderful that we've got this new use for lumber that can be produced in some of those communities. And it's done in a sustainable way. It's done, like, I also planted trees up there. So I planted 100,000 trees is to my credit. I don't know if any of them made it into this tall timber, but I know many people partly paid their way through university planting trees in Northern Ontario. It's a great job, and it's nice to see this happening, this innovation happening, and this carbon sequestering and the zero emissions, because you're showing that it can be done. And it's nice that it's at a public institution like George Brown. So Neris, thank you so much for being here and sharing it. I've seen that Mabel is starting to answer some questions in the chat. So Neris and Mark and Chelsea, you've already spoken. If you can answer some of the questions in the chat as we're going through, we'll go through our other speakers, and that will, maybe answer some of the questions for people towards the end. Let's see. So our next speaker is Jeff Olson from Enwave. Jeff Olson is the Senior Director of Partnerships at Enwave Energy Corporation. Their largest project in our riding is the massive The Well development on Front in Spadina. He is excited to talk about the sustainable thermal energy innovations at The Well and other buildings that use Lake Ontario water. So, Jeff, great to have you here, and thank you for being here. Tell us about geothermal at the Well, or I guess hydrothermal, right?
A little bit of both, but yes, Chris, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And I'll dive right into it. I heard you, Chris, mention geothermal. In a way, deep lake water cooling is a form of geothermal energy, but I won't complicate things by getting into that. But really, the net of it is that we're trying to do low energy, low carbon heating and cooling solutions. So today, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of who and what Enwave is, why we do what we do, and then dig into some of these projects that you mentioned about how we're serving the local community. So I'll share my screen here. There's not going to be a lot of words on the screen. It's mostly pictures. It's how I like to present. So I'm going to start by maybe laying down a bit of a definition. You're going to hear me speak about district energy quite a bit, and so let's sort of define that. What district energy is the central creation of heating and cooling, and then distributing that heating and cooling via fluids underground in pipes, generally chilled water, hot water, and steam. I borrowed this slide from the United Nations. I hope they don't mind, but I really like how they put this. They identified district energy as one of the least cost and most efficient solutions for the reduction of GHGs and primary energy demand. And I think this sums up really well why we do what we do. What we do is heat and cool buildings, but we're really driven by this GHG and energy reduction. I took this picture from the top of the CN Tower a few years ago, and just to give me a perspective of the scope of the buildings that we serve from this particular vantage point at the top of the CN Tower. So it's quite a few buildings. We're about 90 million square feet of space in Toronto. But let's, this is going to be a Toronto-centric presentation, but I want you to know that we do have operations across Eastern Canada, from Windsor and London, where we run heating and cooling, to Charlottetown and Prince Edward Island, where we actually have an amazing waste-to-energy facility delivering low-carbon heating to much of Charlottetown. In Markham, we have a geothermal, geo-exchange-based solution for single-family homes. And then, of course, we're anchored in Toronto with the deep lake water cooling system. We're calling this geothermal in a way, but what I'm going to run through the logistics of what we do. We run, as you can see from this picture, very big pipes, very deep within Lake Ontario. They're almost they're about 90 meters down. And if on this next slide, and I hope that the video syncs with me speaking to it, but if I put a camera about 5 kilometers out into the lake, this is what the skyline would look like. And you see these 3, now 4 pipes that are along the bottom. And those pipes pull this very, very cold water into, actually it comes into the Toronto Island, where the city of Toronto converts it to drinking water. So now you have very cold drinking water that goes in a tunnel under the inner harbor to our heat exchange facility just south of the Rogers Center. And from there, we take the chill from this water, this very, very cold water, we put it into our own pipes and then distribute that very cold water throughout much of downtown. We're going up as far north as Queen's Park, and then out along the lakefront in kind of an inverted T shape. But that's kind of the extent of our cooling. And I hope that makes sense. It's quite a simple solution if you think about it, using cold water in this way. You'll notice some red buildings on here. A lot of this is our legacy steam business. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about hot water and why we're moving to hot water and how we're serving low carbon heating via this as we go through the presentation. And Chris, you and your team said you wanted to learn a little bit more about the well in particular. So let's dive in there. So this is a bit of a map of Toronto. You can see some of our existing blue lines and orange lines for the existing system. The yellow lines leading out to that kind of looks like a gleaming city, golden city there. That is the development that is the well. And I'm sure many of you have seen this. It's nearing completion on its construction. But if you look at these renderings, the N wave component of this is what looks like a big silo underground in these pictures. So if you picture in the middle of the summer at night, when there's not as much cooling load downtown, so we have this excess cooling capacity, we're able to shunt that cold water from deep lake water cooling over to the well and fill up this tank, in a way. So really chilling the water in this tank. The next day, when the rest of the city calls for the deep lake water cooling, the well and the surrounding buildings are going to be using stored chilled water, which is deep lake water cooling source, to meet their cooling needs in still a very energy efficient way. Now, as I said, I love pictures, so I'm going to do a little bit of show and tell here. This is a picture I took from the edge of the well when it was under construction a few years ago. A massive project, 3.5 million square feet, all being built at once. You can sort of see the way that the buildings line up along the south side of this. That's quite a large site. And just going to zoom in a bit here. You see this box. This is kind of the N-wave component of the project. And there you see the construction of that tank that I was mentioning. I want to give a little bit of an order of magnitude here. This tank, we started digging it down at below parking level 6. So we're already really, really deep. And then this is a 55-foot diameter hole in the ground that by the time we dug down and down and down and down and down, we bottomed out at about 150 feet from the bottom of P6. So I gotta say that when you looked over the edge of this hole, and I was privileged to be able to see it, it gave you a sense of vertigo. This is a massive hole in the ground. And at present, it's been slip lined with concrete. It's filled with water, and it is, as we speak, actively heating and cooling the district, because we can charge it up with hot water as well. So it's an active asset, and I got to say, it's a bit of a technological marvel for sure. But this really strikes at a word we like to use a lot at Enwave. That's partnership. We worked with our development partners, Allied, RioCan, Tridel, Woodburn, and Diamond to build this asset. They put their trust in us to be able to put a giant hole in the ground underneath an active construction site. And the results are quite amazing. We're very proud of the work we did with these partners of ours. I've spent most of my time talking about cooling, but I really want to put a little, a highlight. And Neris, thanks for sharing about the Limberlost place. We are using heat recovered or building waste heat to when the construction is complete, to be heating in a low carbon manner Limberlost place, as well as buildings that are on our hot water network. And I'll be very brief when I do this, but it seems ironic, but in the dead of winter, we still cool buildings, data centers, hospitals, and even some commercial buildings. And the act of cooling a building is what you're really doing is you're collecting its heat. You're allowing it to deposit its heat to cool itself. So in this little illustration on the right here, you see these cooling loads that are adding heat to our system. And then when we gather up all of that heat from our district, waste heat, we bring this, in the case of the Bay Adelaide Center that you see here, there's a big heat recovery chiller that then pulls. A heat recovery chiller is also known as a heat pump. You've probably heard of these. And we use that heat pump to upgrade that waste heat and deliver it to buildings like Bay Adelaide, like Limberlost, and hopefully many other buildings in the downtown core as we decarbonize. So that's a little bit about what we do. I will wrap it up. Of course, our core is the district energy system downtown. It's also key to note that we're now building brand new systems from scratch, one in South Mississauga right now as part of our community energy planning team. And then we also just launched an Enwave Geo Communities program where we can now do single buildings that are not district connected, but with a big focus on decarbonization. Wow. So I'll leave it at that and look forward to seeing any questions that come up. Thanks so much, Chris.
Jeff, thank you so much. It's a really fascinating project, and I had no idea about the extent of this. I knew there was deep water cooling. It's been in the process for at least 20 years in yes. Toronto, I think. Eh? Yeah. Yeah. And I saw on the map, it looked like the Ontario legislature is one of the buildings that's connected. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. And if I recall, it's for sure heating. I think it's cooling as well, depending on the color it was on there.
Okay. Wow.
We do deliver cooling all the way up to there. Yeah,
I didn't know. That's really fascinating. Cool. It's great to see, because that's a building. It's wonderful that it's got that hydrothermal, the deep water cooling. There's a number of other changes that need to be made to bring it up to some sort of environmental standard, because it's 150 years old and has single pane windows. But they're working on it. We're working on it. Anyways. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being here. Our final guest of the evening and our final presentation before we go to question and answers is my colleague from the legislature, Sandy Shaw. She's the MPP for Hamilton West, Ancaster Dundas, and the official opposition critic for the Environment, Conservation and Parks. She will be discussing the Ontario government's decision to sell off parts of the Greenbelt with Bill 23 and what we can do about it. So here's an action item for all of us. Sandy, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I apologize for being late. I was in Hamilton at Yom HaShoah event. So I'm really happy to be able to join you now and hear some of the technology that you're proposing. I think these are fantastic ideas. I just want to add, Chris, before we go on, the legislature doesn't have a charging station either, just so you know. I'm looking at a Kona Electric and there's no charging station. So there you go. But yes, I guess in case anyone hasn't heard, newsflash, the Ford government is selling off the Greenbelt. So that's the headline on this. And I think that I want to start by saying, in addition to this being just an outrageous land grab, there's a couple of things I want to start to say right off the bat. The government you know, the way in which they have done this is kind of shady, to say the least. You know, we were concerned about who's benefiting from this, who had the ear of the government, how these deals went down. I mean, some of the, you will all know, but some of the people that bought this land, you know, one person in particular bought $80 million worth of land that was within the Greenbelt, and within months, then it was taken out of Greenbelt protections, connected to the government. So these, the integrity of this is a huge concern for us. We have launched, we've asked the Integrity Commissioner to investigate those connections. We have asked the Auditor General, and she's agreed to investigate whether there's value for money in the sell-off of public lands. So we are looking at the integrity and the connections, to say the least, of how our Greenbelt protections were lifted and put us in the predicament that we are in now. I want to also be really clear that this government talks about the need to build housing, and absolutely we agree. We agree. It's not about whether we need housing, whether we need affordable housing. It's about where we're going to build this housing. And we believe, and most people believe, that building it on the Greenbelt is not the answer. And experts have said over and over again that there's more than enough land to meet the government's the government's 1.5 million homes over 10 years within existing boundaries. No need to build on the Greenbelt, no need to build on our dwindling agricultural land, which we probably know we're losing at the rate of about 320 acres a day of farmland. So this is just a wrong-headed thinking on the part of the government that will only benefit a few people. I would say that, I suppose I don't need to let your viewers, these viewers know, I'm sure they really do understand, but what is at stake when we take protections away from the Greenbelt are, the increased, let's just talk about the biodiversity loss of habitat. We are, building in perhaps what could be floodplains. The Auditor General has a recent report out talking about how the province is just doing such a terrible job of protecting people from flooding and not anticipating the increased flooding that we're going to see given, climate change and the changing pattern of weather, and the concern that this is a government that's going to, build on and let homeowners or people, own homes in an area where they're not protected. I think the other thing about this development that is connected to developers that we need to be aware of is that the government has given the developers, essentially with Bill 23, they've taken away development charges. So developers, we feel, need to pay their fair share, but with the government's basically deregulation or taking away protections for the Greenbelt and essentially, giving a free pass to developers, what we're going to see are municipalities that now rely on those development charges to do things like keep our infrastructure in order, to prevent flooding, to prevent backups. The municipalities are struggling to deal with their aging infrastructure. I should mention, in the city of Hamilton, we had a sewage leak in an area called Coots Paradise, which earns its name. It's just a beautiful area. And we had 24 billion liters of raw sewage, like 24 billion liters of raw sewage go into this protected wetland in Hamilton. A lot of that has to do with aging infrastructure. It's bit more to it than that, but it's lack of oversight and also aging infrastructure. These development charges that are being waived will create such a big revenue hole for municipalities. The Association of Municipalities of Ontario said that it's going to be something like $5 billion that municipalities will no longer have to keep their infrastructure in good working state of good repair. And the only place that this can be, the only way that this revenue loss can be replaced will either be increased loss of services and lack of upkeep on our infrastructure, and increased property taxes. And so we are tracking at the, our MPP, well, I can't remember, Bell, pardon me, is tracking all of the increases in property taxes across the province, and they're substantial. So those are the consequences that we all face whether it's the actual loss of biodiversity, loss of green space, loss of agricultural land, and the price that we will all have to pay for building in the wrong place. I mean, that is just something that, the government of the day, Doug Ford and perhaps his cronies, are going to leave us holding the bag, not only just for the financial damage, but for the damage when it comes to our ecology. I will say, Chris, I mean, what can we do about this, right? Like, what can we do about this? And events like this are exactly what we need to do. We need to be coming together. We have had examples of successful pushbacks when people come together. Duffins Creek is an example where the government issued an MZO to build over a wetland in the area near Ajax, and community members just said like hell no, this is not happening in our community, and they banded together, and the government backed off of that. So they do blink, they will blink, but they have to be shamed into it or pressured into it. It requires government MPPs to hear from us. It's not just we are the Ontario NDP MPPs. We are on board already, and we certainly want to be kept in touch, but the pressure needs to be put on local conservative MPPs, because if they feel the heat in their own ridings, they will go hopefully they'll talk in caucus and say, like, listen, you're killing me with this in my riding. You'll need to do better. And so, that politically, that's how other folks can help. We at the legislature, as you know, Chris, and all of us are standing up every day to ask hard questions about, why this is what the government's choosing to do, and to keep track of, not just building on the Greenbelt, but the slow and, well, not slow, the assault, let's just say, on any environmental protections in the province. We're at the point where there are very few protections left for species at risk. For us as Ontarians, we still have the Environmental Bill of Rights and the Environmental Registry. They're trying to water that down as well. So I think we all need to be keeping our eye on what rights that we have left, and we need to exercise them when things are posted on the Environmental Registry. So those are some of the things that are at play, and these are some of the things that we all can do to push back.
You know what? Thank you, Sandy. Thank you so much, and for those suggestions on how to push back. The other thing I'd like to mention, we have a petition, and maybe Nancy or Benna, somebody from my office, if you could post the petition in the chat and people could sign the petition to save the Greenbelt. The other thing, Sandy, I thank you for your presentation. The Ontario Federation of Agriculture is very opposed to the paving over the Greenbelt. Can you talk a little bit about that? Absolutely.
I mean, I think that it's an unusual situation when the Ontario Federation of Agriculture is at cross purposes with this government. It doesn't happen very often, but the Ontario Federation of Agriculture they have planners, they have people that do good work in understanding how to be good custodians of the land, right? And so they are very concerned with the loss of farmland, and especially the loss of the green belt lands, because people farm the green belt. Like there's lots of agricultural farm activity. I don't know the number, but the green belt. Listen, if I was Mike Schreiner, I'd know the number off the top of my head. But the green belt is responsible for a significant contribution to our economy, whether it's farming. And so I think that the Ontario Federation of Agriculture are really, really opposed to this. And they don't usually come out against the government very vocally, but they see also, generations and generations of farmers have been doing the right thing when it comes to preserving our agriculture. And I think they're just appalled to see all of their good work just, upended with one government.
Yeah. Yes. You know what? I think it really is quite telling when the farmers across the province have stood up and with a unified voice say, hey, we've got to preserve the farmland that we've got. And that statistic that you gave earlier on, the 320 acres a day that we're losing in Ontario, 320 acres of farmland that we're losing a day through development is really quite a frightening statistic. So thank you, Sandy, so much for being here. And thank you for sharing about the Greenbelt. So we're going to go to the Q&A section of the meeting now. And the first question, and I saw there was already some discussion in the chat, but Neris, I'll direct it towards you. It's how are wood buildings made fireproof? And it seems like a pretty logical question, you know, because we actually make campfires out of wood. So how do you protect these buildings?
And it's interesting you mentioned the campfires, because that's often an analogy I use when I describe this. And in the chat, I actually put a link to a national fire test, which took place in Ottawa very recently, with many fire departments from across the country and natural resources. And they built an absolutely realistic multi-floor mock-up, fully mass timber with furniture, everything in it. And they literally set it on fire to see if the wood would act the way it was supposed to. And it did, which is that when we build with this new type of mass timber, it has, you know, I'll say with Limberlost, for instance, what I'll call 7 ply. Only 3 of those are actually structurally necessary. The rest are what we call char layers. And if it was to ever catch fire, it would just char the way a log does on a fire. And then it burns out. And the log itself doesn't burn. You have this char layer. And that actually protects the buildings. And this test that you did, the building was completely burned out. They did, sorry, in Ottawa. The building was completely burned out in under 2 hours.
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting. And it's not something that I knew before. So thank you for explaining that. Our next question, let's see, maybe Mark or maybe you can answer this one. What kind of incentives exist to help with the installing of EV charging and somebody's mentioning a 40-year-old housing co-op? Can older condos accommodate EV charging?
Yeah, so there's a few questions there. One was about incentives. The federal government does have some incentives through Natural Resources Canada. It's not a very simple matter to get the incentive. It's limited, and more people are asking. It's getting harder and harder to get, but we could guide people through that process. In terms of older buildings, you would be surprised. Sometimes we do load evaluations as part of the intake process to see what electricity is available for these chargers. And it's not always older buildings that are having problems. Sometimes they do have enough electricity available. You really have to go in and see for a fact. The person asked about a co-op. Just to be clear, because I mentioned earlier that owners in condos have this right to charge. That doesn't necessarily extend to co-ops. You'd have to get cooperation from the co-op board to be able to do that. They're not covered by the same act.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And, yeah. Anything to add there, Mabel? Or is that more Mark's bailiwick? Okay. Let's see. The next question, again from Mark, about EV charging. Should we be concerned about EV fires in the underground parking of a condominium?
So somehow fires and batteries, they get connected, and suddenly we're worried about this. Frankly speaking, it's not an uncommon question. Liquid fuels are much more flammable, particularly diesel fuel. Diesel fuel tends to be quite thick, and once it catches on fire, it'll actually spread across the floor and help the other cars to catch on fire. So it's just really not that much of a concern. And we do have fire plans in the buildings and ways to be able to take care of this, but it's really not a serious problem that we have to be concerned about.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for that. And
hi, Chris. Sorry to interject. We actually have a live question. Somebody's put their hand up. David Chan.
Go ahead, David.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, my name is David Chan. I'm the president of the East Waterfront Community Association, and I'm also on the condo board of Mon Condominium. I just want to inform everybody that condominiums actually do qualify for this Natural Resource Canada's subsidy of 50% of the cost of installing EV charging infrastructure. And this was given out for the last couple of years. Actually, last summer, our board did receive a request from one of our owners to install EV charging. So we started investigating, and I discovered this, it's called Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program offered by federal government. They have allocated $680 million to fund 50% up to the cost of installing EV charging in what is called multi-residential buildings, which condominiums do qualify. So we did submit last, I think it was September or August 11th, and we have just been notified we qualify for subsidy of up to 40 units. That's what we applied for. So now, as you know, condominiums actually normal without EV charging, they're selling typical car parking lots, maybe 50,000, some even downtown up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you were to buy EV charging equipped lots, developers usually charge anything between 10 to 15,000 more to buy a lot with EV charging. But under this program, I think you can actually get it down to less than $5,000. Actually, it's not cheaper.
You know what, David, be sure to keep me posted on this, because when we get some, the EV charging in this building, and if you, are able to get that funding, I'd like to come by.
I'll show you the link to Natural Resource Canada.
Yeah, actually, you know what? Could you post that in the chat, or we'll get somebody?
Yeah, of course, there's the link to the Natural Resource Canada. Yeah, and it's quite easy. Quite a lot of condominiums have got approval already.
Oh,
all
great.
you need to do is to get a company like Mark's company. All they have to do is come and investigate your electrical sort of services in your condominium to see whether they need to increase the voltage or increase the supply. And the best solution apparently is to use a standard electrical panel. You don't want a smart electrical panel because those changes. And then you use a smart charger, because smart chargers are using software update, that's all.
Okay.
So we are now in the process of on the next stage to see how we can sort of implement that.
Well, that's really wonderful work, and thank you for sharing that, David. Okay. Mabel, while we're on electric vehicles, Mabel, I'm going to go to you with this question that came up earlier in the chat. Do the cars, so if peak power, if you plug in your car at work, where you park at work, and they draw some of the electricity out of it, does the car have enough power to get home after giving it away? And I'm assuming it's not actually giving it away, right?
Well, that depends. The goal is that you get paid for it, which will require some evolution of our market rules and rate structures to make that possible for everybody. But yeah, that's a good question. So for our pilot project at the moment, we give our participants the option to either drive home after the event, in which case we charge it to, for example, 20% state of charge to make sure everybody can get home, or the option to slow charge overnight to maximize the environmental benefits. And in future, we would envisage, for example, residential programs will provide the option to everybody to set their preferences. So for example, perhaps you always want to keep 20% charge in your vehicle so that you can run a quick errand that's unplanned or an emergency trip to a local hospital, and provide flexibility for the rest of your battery. And somebody else asked about degradation, which again is a really smart question to ask. The example I gave of supporting the grid in just the handful of top peak days a year creates the most value and the least degradation. But there is going to be a balance point. For example, technically EVs could provide all sorts of services, including daily instantaneous balancing services for the grid. But those types of things do cause more degradation. And so in the future, everybody's going to want to be able to set their preferences of how much degradation are they willing to accept? What is their trade-off of, how much do they want to keep their vehicle available for their own use versus allow it to make money for them when it's in a parking lot? And also for resiliency applications, for EVs can provide backup power. So similarly, there will be, smart software can provide those trade-offs. So for example, if a storm is coming, perhaps more power is saved in the battery just in case there's a power cut, so that it can be used for backup power.
Wow, that's really brilliant. That's really brilliant. As somebody who lived through the 2003 blackout, yeah, something like that would have been really helpful, I think, because a lot of us were without electricity for a couple of days there.
Absolutely, and a typical small vehicle can provide backup power to a home for up to 3 days. So you can see how the capacity really adds up. It's a very significant quantity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. This question, Mark or Mabel, whoever wants to answer it. My concern is the balance with drilling the minerals required for batteries and protection of wildlife. How can we do both?
Mabel, you want to do minerals?
Sure. I'm afraid I'm not an expert on minerals, so I can't speak to that. But I can say that that's actually another reason that vehicle to grid has become a really hot topic, and sort of the societal benefits are under discussion, because we know that we're going to need batteries to support the grid as we add more renewables. And so what vehicle to grid enables us to do is to use the same batteries for 2 different uses, for transportation and to support the grid, instead of the challenges that we expect to see of creating competition between stationary batteries. You know, there's only so much lithium available, and all those lithium ion batteries, there's going to be competition between demand from vehicles and demand for grid applications. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that an EV towards the end of its life, it may no longer be useful in a vehicle once the range decreases beyond a certain number of kilometers. But that battery can still be useful to support the grid. And so there's also research on looking at, it's not happened to my knowledge yet, but there's a lot of interest in looking at second life applications for, instead of throwing out or recycling the components of vehicle batteries when they're no longer useful in a vehicle, can we still use them as a battery, but for a different purpose?
Okay, thank you.
Keep in mind that when we build the battery, 10 years later, more or less everything we built into the battery is still there, and we can recover it. If we drove that same vehicle for 10 years with gasoline or diesel fuel in it, we have nothing. So, you know, allow for the possibility. I keep saying, you know, things are going to change. Allow for the possibility these technologies are going to adapt as more batteries become available. And I don't think there's anybody that has any thought that we're going to simply dig a hole in the ground and drop batteries into it. This is not going to happen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to switch over. Jeff, we've got a question for you. I've got a couple of questions. One is, and I'll ask this one, is there a concern that using Lake Ontario water cooling will raise the temperature of the lake too quickly, causing problems?
Yeah, it's a unique feature of Lake Ontario and of water itself that the coolest water, the 4 degrees Celsius water, sinks to the bottom of the lake. So every winter, when at the end of the season, all that cold water sinks to the very bottom. So we have a very large reservoir of cold water, and it's replenished every winter. And it's also such a vast lake that we put barely a dent in even that reservoir.
No, interesting. Wow. You know, I tried some, you know, they have craft beer. This craft beer from, let's see, up north, they actually brew the beer at the bottom of the lake because it's cool and it's dark. And apparently those are the conditions that you need for cooling beer. So I don't know if, you know, N-Wave wants to get into the craft brewery business, but maybe that's something else that you can do with that.
We are simply supportive of our partner, Steam Whistle, who are an N-Wave customer. So.
Okay, great. The next question I've got for you, Jeff, is our building has 200 units at Queens Quay and Bathurst. We use fan coil units for heating and cooling. Is there any way for our building to access the cooling effects of the N-Wave project? And if not, how do we reduce our dependence on gas in the winter and electricity in the summer?
Yeah, that location at Bathurst is a little bit far away from our current infrastructure, but we are always looking to expand. And so I'd frankly, you can reach out to me at jeff.olson@nwave.com. Happy to have a conversation. But really, it comes down to the cost benefit and what the goals of the building are. So. It would be a little bit tricky, but there are all sorts of options that we are exploring for existing buildings. I don't know who I stole this joke from, but someone once said, "Did you know that 100% of buildings are existing buildings?" And really the point is, if we're going to have a big dent on decarbonization of buildings, we have to look at existing building stock, and that's an area of great interest to Enwave. But please reach out to me if you have questions. Okay, thank you, Jeff. Over to Sandy. What is the official opposition doing to counter the government's plans to ramp up gas power by more than 700% and build new and extend old nuclear reactors in the GATA?
Well, I think that I think the energy file is a messy file with this government. I mean, I think what when they came to power, they said that they were going to clean up the energy mess, and they're only making it worse. They have, as you've identified, are ramping up gas-fired generators. I think we are trying to get the government to actually set targets and to follow them. They're not transparent with their targets. They don't have a climate plan, or they have a pamphlet, I would call it. It's not a credible climate plan, and they don't have alternatives. I mean, the first thing that they did when they came to power was to take away any kind of renewable energy infrastructure that was being built. I mean, we've heard about them ripping charging stations out of the ground. Maybe there was one at Queen's Park they ripped out, I don't know. You know, they tore down literally wind turbines fields that were already almost at completion, and paid a hefty price to cancel that. And finally, you know, one of the things that I don't know if we talked about it here, but the cheapest form of energy is conservation. And the government has also taken away any incentives for people to be able to engage in conservation, just, you know, changing their windows, switching to alternative types of energy, fuel, for example, heat pumps, something that we should be innovating. We should be making those available to residential folks as well. So these are the ideas we're putting in front of the government. They're not really receptive to criticism or to ideas when it comes to climate change and energy. So all I can say is that we have a fantastic energy critic, Peter Tabbins. You may be familiar with him, and he's very, very knowledgeable on the energy file. And I think as long as we're making transparent that this government is going the wrong way when it comes to how we create and how we use energy in the province.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. Let's see, I see a comment in here. We've got the zero, so thank you, David. We've got the zero emission application site on the website is now on the in the chat, and we've also got let's see, the Chelsea, I see you've put up the U of T trash team, you know, that site as well. So if people want to learn more about it, they can follow your work there. You know, I really want to ask this too, because I've seen there's an annual report that comes out about the water condition in the harbor, and it's not pretty, that report. Is that what inspired your trash team to start collecting some of the floatables? It's just a disgusting term, actually.
Fighting floatables, everything hard to say. I think you're talking about the State of the Great Lakes reports that's mandated by the Great Lakes Water Quality Act.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, I started working on plastic pollution about 15 years ago. So I was actually inspired by the garbage patches in the middle of the ocean. And then I moved to Toronto, and what I saw in the Great Lakes, which is a lot of plastic pollution, I got inspired to work really locally. But the reports you're talking about, which say, you know, how is our lake doing in terms of pollution, in terms of invasive species, all kinds of different issues, fisheries, they actually, ECCC contracted us last year to write a report to say, how could we include plastic pollution as a sub-indicator, and should we be monitoring it regularly? So we've been working with the government to try to inform how we would monitor and whether plastic should be considered a priority contaminant of concern under that act. And so, yes, I'm inspired by that and trying to work with that, but I got inspired by this issue a while ago, just for being someone who loves the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I mean, we're so fortunate to live on one of the largest freshwater bodies in the world, and it's, you know, we have not been treating it well. So thank you for your role in helping to clean it up. I've got a question here that came in before the meeting. Somebody emailed this in advance. Why is 72% of municipal waste streams coming from condo high-rise buildings still going to landfills despite on-site segregation best practices? And we got none of our panelists, I don't think, have an expertise in this, but we did get a response for that person if you're on the call. And we got it from Toronto Solid Waste Management Services. We can post it in the chat. It's pretty long, but anyways, and we will send out notes after this meeting as well. So if anybody's interested in that, let's see. What can, and this one will open up to the entire panel, what can older condominiums do to make themselves greener? What organizations do we turn to for reputable advice on this? And does the province have any funding assistance for our transition? So we've already talked about EV charging stations. Is there other ways that buildings can become more green?
I mean, I can add something relevant actually to the question before, is that I think that the waste management in apartment buildings and condos in the city of Toronto is handled differently than houses, and the ability to recycle, like having the recycled bins, having the green bins, is not as accessible as it is if you live in a house and you have that bin right at your house. So I think asking representatives, and often that is the city, to be able to change the solid waste management within apartments to make it better, and then asking for better information on what can you recycle, what can you not recycle. And then there's a question in the chat, actually, if I can answer it, about that's related to your question about what can we do from synthetic clothing released during laundry. So we've tested washing machine filters, and they actually capture about 90% of the microfibers, the plastic pollution that comes from our clothing. And so in condo buildings and big high rises, you could actually have filters that connects, the gray water from the washing machines, or you can have them in your buildings. It depends on how laundry is done, but you certainly can capture that. So it doesn't go to a wastewater treatment plant.
Oh, that's really interesting.
If I could just add, Chris, just so where we have tabled legislation in the House, a bill that would require manufacturers to add the kind of filter that you're talking to their machines, just at source. It's a very cheap fix apparently, and that it would reduce something like up to, I think, 87% or 90% of the microplastics that come through laundry could be captured by this filter. A simple solution, but it just needs some government leadership on it. But we have a bill. It's Jessica Bell's bill that I co-sponsored. As it's being tabled in the legislature. So that's great.
And where can we get one of those filters?
You can actually buy them on Amazon. You can buy the Filtrol, the brand. But the bill that Jessica Bell brought to the table would actually make it so that washing machine manufacturers have to install washing machines with them in there already, and the consumer doesn't have to buy them.
Okay. We're going to wrap up, and it's been a fascinating conversation, but because we're running short on time, and I just want to make sure that everybody gets a couple of closing remarks. And I also want to have an opportunity. Earth Day, the reason that we're having our Earth Day Summit is Earth Day is this Saturday, April 22nd. And there's ways for everybody who's on here to get involved. So I'm going to read out some of the cleanups that are happening in the Spadina Fort York riding, and then I'll turn it back to our panelists, and I'll give each of you a chance for, just a 1 minute or 2 minutes summary, and any last thoughts that you want to share with the people who tuned in tonight. So the Waterfront BIA cleanup is Friday, April 21st. It's happening all day. Gloves and bags are going to be available. It's the corner of Queens Harbor and Bay is where you're meeting from 9 a.m. 9 a.m. till noon. 9 a.m. So it's just the morning. The Waterfront BIA cleanup. Garment District cleanup, Saturday, April 22nd from 12 till 2. St. Andrew's Playground. Bags and gloves will be provided. The Old Town Toronto cleanup, Saturday, April 22nd, 9 till noon. It's at St. James and Crombie and Bursey Park. So Old Town, the community is doing 3 different cleanups. Don't mess with the dawn cleanup. This is a big one. I've been out for it before. It's from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock, again on Saturday, April 22nd on Earth Day at Ernest Thompson Seton Park. The Friends of Corkdown cleanup is happening from 10 till noon. in the Front and Bayview area, the Island Shoreline cleanup. Wow, I got to say, the people in Spadina, Fort York, our community groups are very active on Earth Day. We've got a lot of cleanups. I'm going to be trying to get out to as many as I can. The Island Shoreline cleanup is happening from 10 a.m. till 1 p.m. The ferry parts at 9:30, 10:30, and 11:30. I'm going to be getting on, I think, the earliest ferry to get out to the island to help with that shoreline cleanup. And the Earth Day Festival at Downsview Park. So this is outside of our riding, but it's one of the biggest ones in the city. It's happening Sunday, April 23rd from 11 a.m. till 4 p.m. at 70 Canuck Avenue. And it's a free event for the entire family with kids play zone, hands-on activities, and many opportunities to learn. So there's some cleanups. If anybody can come out on the weekend to help with the Earth Day cleanups in the community, we'll post these on our website. So if you didn't get the details as I was reading them, you can get the details on our website. It's chrisglovermpp.ca. And there's also some resources that we'll be posting on the website as well. So I'll turn it over to our panelists for a few final words, and we'll go through just as I see you on the screen. So Neris, do you want to go first? Any final thoughts?
Thank you. I would just add that I did post a link to the Limberlost Place website for anybody who's interested. There's some amazing videos on there, as well as some further information about the building. And further, I would say to remember that George Brown considers themselves part of the community. We're a community college. Our buildings are publicly accessible and we welcome visitors. And when Limberlost Place opens, we will have a couple of months of soft opening, likely before our students start in the building in January 2025. And we will welcome the community to come and look at what we've achieved and really feel the warmth of our mass timber building. So we look forward to opening it to the community at that point.
When's the completion date? When will it be opening, do you think?
We're opening it for students January 2025, okay. But we're targeting completion for the fall of 2024.
Okay, that's very exciting. Very exciting. It's wonderful to watch it going up there. Thank you, Neris, for being here and sharing that.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, and Chelsea, final words.
Sure. I guess I would say if you're looking for what you can do for Earth Day, one of the things we suggest is trying to become waste literate. So that means understanding all the materials that we use and what we are supposed to do with them at their end of life. And that starts with using the Toronto Waste Wizard, going online, understanding our waste management, and where things can't fit, in the recycle bin or reused, contact your representatives and ask them to make changes in our community. And then the other thing I'll just say is that our work will start in this area in just a few weeks. So come out, look for us. We'll have just as many trash traps as last year, but we'll have an extra one in Peter Street Basin. We'll have an art installation that'll be up there in June, which is a bunch of our litter that we collected last year. So feel free to join us for any of our events and join the U of T trash team.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thanks. I didn't know that I'd be joining a trash team. I may have aspired to other teams, but I think it's really important work that you guys are doing. I don't know how that actually works on the student's resume though, when they put that out. Oh yeah, U of T trash team.
We should have had a different name, maybe. I don't know.
No, it's really important work, and I think it gives them an opportunity to explain it too. So, Mark, final word.
Sure. Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it. It shouldn't take 2 years to figure out how to put EV charging in your condo. So if you're an owner, you're a board member, or you're a manager, reach out to us and we'll help you, guide you through the process. It doesn't have to be endlessly long. And I think let's see if we can just get you to the finish line where I think you're going to be anyways.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mark. Mabel, over to you.
It's been a pleasure speaking this evening, and thank you again for organizing such a wonderful event. If anybody has any more questions, or you'd like to, you're interested in participating in any of our pilot projects, please feel free to reach out on our website. I've put our website in the chat, and I look forward to next Earth Day.
Okay, thank you so much for being here, Mabel. Jeff, final thoughts.
Thank you again, Chris. Maybe I'll just use this time to answer a question you had posed there. What can you do for buildings? I will highlight that one of the biggest offenders in the climate world is the heating of buildings specifically. And this is an area that MWave is putting big focus on. And the anchor technology we're going to, like if you're on our district, we can help you out by connection, but we're really going after geothermal, geo-exchange as a technology to be able to connect any building anywhere to low carbon heating, cooling. So jeff.olson@nwave.com if you want to reach out. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Sandy.
Yes, thanks, Chris, for hosting this. In the short time that I've on, I've learned a lot, and I think that's really the direction that we need to go, is to showcase and support how we're innovating, how we're commercializing these technologies that are accessible to everyone. They're there. We just need some leadership to get them into the hands of consumers. Some of these things are simple. Some of these things are an investment, but we have to do this work to make people feel confident that they can adopt these technologies and that they're not only the right thing to do, but that it's the right thing for their lives or for their properties, or for people investing in EVs. That's a big commitment on the part of people, and they have to feel confident that that's something that they can do to play their part. But I just will end with saying, you ask a politician a question, I'm going to give you a political answer, which is that we all need support at the legislature to put the pressure on the government to raise awareness. Our job is to hold the government to account, to propose legislation. We do the best that we can, but any way in which you would like to provide input to say this would be a good piece of legislation. The microplastic filter is an example of something that came from outside to us to create a piece of legislation. And for example, on Earth Day, I'm tabling 5 motions, including one that came from the UN goals to declare 30% of land and water in Ontario to protected by 2030. Things like that resonate with people, that come from the community, they're supported by the community, and we can sort of do what we do in the legislature and connect with what's happening in the community and in the IT sector. That helps us do our job so much better. So keep us in the loop, reach out to us, send us the information, and help us do our job better. So thank you very much for all your work in this area. It's exciting. It's really exciting, and we all should be excited about this. It should feel exciting at the legislature. We should have a government that's excited.
It is. You know what? I mean, it's an incredible opportunity. We've got the technology, to get off of fossil fuels. The technology is available now, and we've seen from our panelists, many of you have the solutions, and you're actually working on implementing those solutions. So we can reduce our pollution. We can drastically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. There's no excuse for us not to achieve that 50% reduction by 2030. Before we tune out, I just want to thank Nancy and Benna and Sam from my office. Can we all give them a round of applause for putting this all together? It's been an incredible panel discussion and a really, really informative conversation. Thank you so much. And I'll just leave everybody with these final thoughts, actions you can take coming out of this meeting. Remember, think globally, act locally. So acting locally, you can sign the Greenbelt petition. It's in the chat. It's on the website. Participate in a cleanup day this coming weekend on Saturday, the Earth Day, and there's some cleanups happening on the Sunday as well. Get a microplastic filter for your washing machine and ask your building about building management or your board about EV charging and deep water cooling. And look out for Chelsea's trash team down on the waterfront this summer. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for everything that you're doing to help all of us to be stewards of this land for the next 15,000 years. So we're all rowing in that direction. Thank you all for being here.